The morning sun peeked through worn curtains as David Miller stood at the small stove in his apartment kitchen. The sizzle of eggs filled the air while he glanced at the stack of bills on the counter. Each envelope seemed to mock him with its red final notice stamp. "Emily, breakfast is ready, sweetheart," he called out, his voice warm despite his worries. The patter of small feet echoed down the narrow hallway as Emily emerged, already dressed in her school uniform. Her brown hair was pulled back in a somewhat messy ponytail, and her bright smile lit up the tiny kitchen. "Something smells good, Daddy." She climbed onto one of the mismatched chairs at their small table. David slid a plate of scrambled eggs and slightly burnt toast in front of her. "Sorry about the toast. The toaster's acting up again." "I like it crispy," Emily said, taking a big bite. She never complained, not even when things weren't perfect. That only made David want to give her more. He sat down across from her with his own plate, though his appetite was lacking. "Hey, sweetie, I need to tell you something about today." Emily looked up, her fork pausing halfway to her mouth. "I got called in for a catering job at a wedding. It's last minute, but the pay is good." He tried to sound upbeat. "Mrs. Rodriguez next door said she'd check in on you after school until I get home." "A wedding?" Emily's eyes sparkled. "Will there be a beautiful cake? And dancing?" David couldn't help but smile at her enthusiasm. "All of that and more. It's at some fancy estate in the countryside. Like in the fairy tales? Something like that." He reached across the table to fix her crooked collar. "I just wish I didn't have to leave you alone so much." Emily stood up and walked around the table, wrapping her arms around his neck. "Don't be sad, Daddy. You're the best dad ever, and maybe they'll let you bring home some cake." David hugged her back, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo. "What did I do to deserve such an amazing daughter?" "You got lucky," she giggled, then grabbed her backpack from the chair where she'd dropped it. "I better go, or I'll miss the bus. Hold on." David reached for his worn wallet and pulled out $2. "For milk money." Emily hugged him again. "Love you, Daddy. Good luck at the wedding." After she left, David stood in the quiet kitchen, looking at the bills again. The rent was due next week, and Emily needed new shoes. This catering job couldn't have come at a better time. 3 hours later, David pulled into the long driveway of the Hamilton estate. His old car seemed out of place among the luxury vehicles parked in the staff area. The mansion loomed ahead, its stone walls and manicured gardens speaking of old money and privilege. Inside, David found himself in a whirlwind of pre-wedding activity. The catering manager, a stern woman named Helen, handed him a pressed black uniform. "Change quickly," she instructed. "We need all hands on deck for setup." In the staff bathroom, David put on the crisp white shirt and black vest. The uniform fit well enough, though the bow tie felt like it was choking him. As he adjusted it in the mirror, he barely recognized himself. When was the last time he dressed up like this? The answer came unbidden. Sarah's funeral, 5 years ago. He pushed the thought away and headed back to work. The great hall was a flurry of activity. Florists arranged elaborate centerpieces, while other servers set up tables with fine china and crystal glasses. Through the tall windows, David could see the wedding ceremony space being prepared on the lawn, white chairs lined up in perfect rows. As he helped arrange place cards on tables, music drifted in from the adjacent ballroom. The wedding band was doing their sound check, and the lead singer's voice carried through the doors, practicing an old love song. David stopped for a moment, memories washing over him. He used to sing that same song in college, back when he performed at local venues and dreamed of making it big. Sarah had always been in the front row, cheering him on. They'd had such plans before. "Miller, those place cards won't set themselves." Helen's sharp voice snapped him back to reality. He quickened his pace, arranging the elaborate cards with their gold calligraphy. That was a different life, he reminded himself. Now he had more important things to focus on, like making sure Emily had everything she needed. The afternoon flew by in a blur of preparations. Before David knew it, guests were arriving for the reception. He stood at attention with a silver tray of champagne flutes, offering them to elegantly dressed people who barely glanced his way. The band struck up a lively tune as the newlyweds made their grand entrance. David watched from his corner as they took to the dance floor, young and in love, their whole lives ahead of them. The bride's dress sparkled under the crystal chandeliers, and her father wiped away tears as he watched them dance. More songs followed, and David moved through the crowd like a shadow, collecting empty glasses and offering full ones. He overheard snippets of conversations about summer homes and European vacations, reminders of a world he'd never belonged to. The band was good, he had to admit. Professional and polished, their music filling the grand ballroom with energy. But as he served champagne to yet another group of guests, David had no idea that in just a few minutes, everything would change. The grand ballroom buzzed with celebration, as crystal glasses clinked and laughter echoed off the ornate walls. David weaved between tables with practiced care, balancing a tray of champagne flutes. His black waiter's vest felt tight in the warm room as he dodged enthusiastic dancers and tipsy guests. "Champagne, sir?" he offered, stopping at a table where an elderly gentleman gestured for a drink. The man barely noticed him, focused on the band that had just taken the stage. The 7-piece ensemble launched into an upbeat melody that had several couples rushing to the dance floor. David kept his eyes down, determined to remain invisible as he worked. Still, he couldn't help but tap his foot to the rhythm as he collected empty glasses. The music reminded him of happier times, of evenings spent singing to his wife while she cooked dinner, both of them dancing in their tiny kitchen. The lead singer, a young man in a sleek blue suit, commanded the stage with energy. But as the third song began, something wasn't right. The singer's voice wavered, his face growing pale under the spotlight. He grabbed the microphone stand for support, struggling through another verse before his knees buckled. "Oh my God!" someone screamed as the singer collapsed. The music screeched to a halt. The drummer jumped up to help while the guitarist tried to keep the show going with an awkward instrumental. Guests stood from their tables, craning their necks to see what had happened. David found himself moving toward the stage, his server's instincts kicking in to help. He set his tray down and climbed the steps just as the band manager was helping the sick singer to a chair. "He's been fighting the flu," the manager explained, fanning the singer's face. "I told him not to perform today." The bride appeared at the edge of the stage, her white dress rustling. "Is everything okay? What about our first dance?" "I'm so sorry," the manager said, looking desperate. "We can try to." In the confusion, David steadied a tilting microphone stand. The mic slipped from its holder, and he caught it reflexively. A guest in the front row noticed and called out, "Hey, waiter, you know any songs?" A few people laughed. David's heart thundered in his chest as all eyes turned to him. He hadn't sung in public since before Emily was born, since before Sarah died. The bride looked at him with pleading eyes. "Can you, please? We just need one song for our first dance." David's mouth went dry. The mic felt heavy in his hands. He thought of Sarah, of how she used to beg him to sing at their favorite restaurant's open mic nights. He thought of Emily, who still asked to hear Daddy's songs before bed. He started, his voice barely a whisper. The groom stepped forward, taking his bride's hand. "Just one song, man. You'd be saving our wedding." David closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and nodded. The band members looked at him expectantly. "Bridge over Troubled Water," he suggested quietly to the pianist. "In G?" The pianist nodded, and his fingers found the keys. The gentle introduction filled the room, and David felt his world narrow to just this moment, just this song that he'd sung to Sarah so many times. His voice, when it came, started soft but grew stronger with each word. "When you're weary, feeling small." The rich, soulful tone filled every corner of the ballroom. Years of emotion poured through him. Love, loss, hope, and healing. The room fell completely silent. The bride and groom swayed together, tears streaming down their faces as David's voice soared through the chorus. He saw their love reflected in each other's eyes and sang directly to them, turning his own story of love and loss into their story of new beginnings. Elderly couples held hands tighter, young lovers drew closer. Parents pulled their children into embraces. David's voice wrapped around them all, pure and true, carrying years of unsung melodies. The final note hung in the air like a prayer. For a moment no one moved, no one breathed. Then the room erupted in thunderous applause. People jumped to their feet, cheering and wiping tears from their eyes. The bride broke away from her groom and hugged David fiercely. "That was the most beautiful thing I've ever heard," she whispered, her mascara leaving marks on his white shirt. David's hands trembled as he set the microphone down. His legs felt weak as he stepped back, overwhelmed by the response. The applause continued, but he was already backing away, slipping off the stage. His heart pounded in his ears as he retreated to the shadows where servers belonged. He pressed himself against a cool wall, trying to steady his breathing. That voice, the one he'd locked away with his grief, had finally broken free. And now, everyone knew. They had seen past his server's uniform to the singer underneath, the man he used to be, the man he'd tried to forget. The applause still rang in David's ears as guests swarmed around him, faces bright with emotion pressed close, hands reaching out to pat his shoulders and shake his hand. Their words tumbled over each other in an excited rush. "That was incredible. Where did you learn to sing like that? I've never heard anything so beautiful." David's cheeks flushed, hot as he clutched his empty serving tray like a shield. After years of blending into the background, all this attention made him dizzy. He spotted Emily pushing through the crowd, her blue dress swishing as she ran toward him. "Daddy," she cried, throwing herself into his arms. "You were amazing. I told you you could do it." He scooped her up, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "Hey, sweetie. I thought you were at Grandma Betty's? She brought me. She didn't want me to miss it when she heard you were singing." Emily beamed up at him, her eyes shining with pride. An elegant woman in her 60s approached them, her silver hair swept into a graceful updo. Her kind eyes crinkled at the corners as she smiled. "Mr. Miller? I'm Clara Johnson. I simply must tell you how moved I was by your performance." David shifted Emily to his hip, extending his free hand. "Thank you, ma'am. I was just trying to help out when their singer got sick." "Don't be modest," Clara said warmly. "That kind of talent shouldn't be hidden away. Tell me, have you had professional training?" "Some years ago." David's throat tightened. "Before my wife passed." Clara's expression softened with understanding. She turned to Emily, who was watching their exchange intently. "And who is this lovely young lady?" I'm Emily." His daughter stuck out her small hand importantly. "Daddy used to sing all the time before Mommy went to heaven. Now he only sings when he thinks I'm asleep." David's heart clenched at her words. Clara studied them both thoughtfully. "Emily, do you like music too?" The little girl nodded eagerly. "I want to learn piano more than anything." "But," she glanced at her father, "we can't afford lessons right now." "Emily," David murmured, embarrassed. But Clara was already reaching into her purse. She pulled out an elegant business card. "I run the Johnson Arts Foundation. We provide musical education to promising young students." She pressed the card into David's hand. "I'd like to sponsor Emily's piano lessons. Full scholarship." David stared at the card, stunned. "Mrs. Johnson, that's incredibly generous, but I couldn't—" "Please," Clara interrupted gently. "Consider it my investment in both your futures. Music has a way of healing hearts and opening doors." She squeezed his arm. "Don't let fear hold you back any longer, Mr. Miller. You have a gift." Emily bounced excitedly in his arms. "Can I, Daddy? Please?" Looking at his daughter's hopeful face, David felt something crack open in his chest, something that had been locked away since Rachel's death. Maybe it was time to stop hiding. "Thank you," he whispered. "We'd be honored." The drive home that night felt different somehow, filled with possibility instead of exhaustion. Emily chattered the whole way about which songs she wanted to learn first. In their small apartment kitchen, David made hot chocolate while Emily sat at the table, still too excited to sleep. "Maybe things are really going to change now," he said, setting her mug down. "Maybe we can finally—" The harsh ring of the phone cut through their cozy moment. David frowned at the late hour but picked up the receiver. "Hello? We saw the video." His mother-in-law's cold voice froze him in place. "Making a spectacle of yourself at someone else's wedding. Have you no shame?" David's hand tightened on the phone. "Margaret, Rachel would be mortified." His father-in-law's voice joined in, "Serving drinks like a common waiter, then trying to relive your foolish dreams of being a singer. Is this how you plan to raise our granddaughter?" "I'm doing my best," David said quietly, turning away so Emily wouldn't see his face. "I work hard to give her a good life." "A good life?" Margaret's laugh was bitter. "In that tiny apartment? With no stability? No proper guidance? Perhaps it's time we discussed more suitable arrangements for Emily's care. Ice spread through David's veins. What are you saying? We've been patient, his father-in-law said. Given you time to prove yourself a fit parent. But this latest stunt shows your priorities are still misplaced. Our lawyer will be in touch. The line went dead. David stood frozen, the dial tone buzzing in his ear. Behind him, Emily's spoon clinked against her mug as she hummed happily, unaware that everything had just shifted. "Time for bed, sweetheart," he managed to say, his voice surprisingly steady. "Okay." She hopped up and hugged him tight. "I'm so proud of you, Daddy. Tonight was the best night ever." "Ah!" He held her close, memorizing the feel of her small arms around his waist. "I love you, Em, so much." "I love you. Love you too." She skipped off to her room, leaving him alone with the silence. David sank into a kitchen chair, staring at the phone that had delivered such joy and terror in the same evening. The business card Mrs. Johnson had given him lay on the table, its elegant lettering promising new beginnings. But his in-laws' threats echoed in his mind, poisoning the hope he'd felt earlier. The kitchen clock ticked steadily, marking time as David sat motionless, his cold mug of cocoa untouched. Just hours ago, he'd felt like his life was finally turning around. Now he faced losing the one thing that mattered most, his daughter. Through the thin walls, he could hear Emily humming herself to sleep, the same song he'd sung at the wedding. The sound twisted in his chest like a knife. He dropped his head into his hands. Shoulders slumped under the weight of what was coming. Morning sunlight streamed through the kitchen window, casting a warm glow on the worn wooden table where David and Emily sat eating breakfast. Steam rose from David's coffee mug as he watched his daughter drowning her pancakes in syrup, her legs swinging happily beneath her chair. "Emmy," he said softly, setting down his cup. "Remember Mrs. Johnson from the wedding?" Emily nodded, her mouth full of pancake. "The nice lady in the sparkly dress?" "That's right." David smiled, running his finger along the rim of his mug. "Well, she's having a big party soon, something called a charity gala, and she—" He paused, his heart beating faster. "She asked if I would sing there." Emily's fork clattered against her plate. Her eyes grew wide as saucers. "Really? Like at the wedding?" "Even bigger. There'll be lots of important people there." "You have to do it, Daddy." Emily bounced in her seat, her dark curls bouncing with her. "Please say you'll do it." David looked at his daughter's shining face and felt his doubts surface. "I don't know, sweetheart. It's been so long since I've performed properly, and with work, and taking care of you." "I'll help," Emily declared. "I can practice piano while you practice singing. We can do it together, over the next few weeks, their small apartment filled with music in the evenings." After long days of waiting tables, David would stand in their living room, working through old songs he used to know. Emily sat at the second-hand keyboard. Mrs. Johnson had helped them acquire, carefully picking out simple melodies and scales. Mrs. Martinez from next door often knocked to tell them how beautiful it sounded. She'd bring over homemade cookies, saying, "Music needs sweet things to keep it company." Her kindness helped ease the sting when other neighbors whispered in the hallway about that foolish waiter who thinks he's going to be a star. One evening, as David practiced an old love song, his phone buzzed. His mother-in-law's name flashed on the screen. With a heavy sigh, he answered, "Hello, Margaret." "David." Her voice was crisp and cold. "We heard about this performance you're planning. It's for charity," he said quietly, moving to his bedroom so Emily wouldn't hear. "Mrs. Johnson is very respected in the community." "Respected, yes. But what about responsibility? What about Emily's stability?" Her words dripped with disapproval. "First that spectacle at the wedding, now this. It seems you're more interested in chasing spotlights than being a proper father." The words hit him like a physical blow. After hanging up, David sat on his bed, head in his hands. Maybe they were right. Maybe he was being selfish, dreaming of singing again. The bills on his counter didn't care about music. Emily needed new school shoes, not a father trying to relive his youth. But when he stepped back into the living room, Emily was still at her keyboard, her small fingers moving carefully over the keys. Her face showed such concentration, such joy. She looked up and beamed at him, Watch, Daddy. I learned the first part of Twinkle, Twinkle. She played the simple melody, missing a few notes but pressing on with determination. The sight of her trying so hard gave him strength. He couldn't give up, not when she was working so diligently herself. Days passed, filled with work and practice, and more disapproving calls from his in-laws. David felt the weight of their judgment, but he kept singing. Sometimes his voice would shake with nerves, other times it would soar clear and strong through their apartment. Emily never failed to applaud, even when he made mistakes. One night, after a particularly long practice session, David sat slumped on their old couch. Doubt gnawed at him again as he remembered Margaret's words about stability. Emily approached quietly, holding her school notebook. "I made something for you," she said, suddenly shy. She placed the notebook in his lap and curled up next to him. David opened it to find pages covered in Emily's careful handwriting. At the top, she'd drawn musical notes in different colors. Below were messages. "You're the best daddy in the world. Your voice makes people happy. Don't give up." On the last page was a poem, written in her neatest handwriting. "My daddy has a special song that lives inside his heart. It makes people smile when they hear it. Just like at the wedding start, I hope one day he'll sing my words and know how brave he is. Because when Daddy shares his music, the whole world fills with bliss." David's vision blurred with tears as he pulled Emily into a tight hug. She wrapped her small arms around his neck, holding on just as firmly. In that moment, all the whispers and doubts faded away. His daughter's faith in him was worth more than any critic's words. "Thank you, sweetheart," he whispered into her hair. "This means everything to me." Emily squeezed him tighter. "You're going to be amazing at the gala, Daddy. I just know it." They sat together on the couch, the notebook open between them, while the last light of day painted their small apartment in soft golden hues. The simple love in Emily's words gave David the courage to face whatever challenges lay ahead. The grand ballroom of the Heritage Hotel sparkled like a scene from a fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast dancing lights across marble floors, and the sweet perfume of fresh flowers filled the air. David Miller stood at the entrance, tugging nervously at his borrowed suit jacket while Emily bounced excitedly beside him. "Daddy, look at all the lights," Emily whispered, her eyes wide with wonder. Before David could respond, Mrs. Clara Johnson glided toward them, elegant in a deep blue evening gown. Her warm smile immediately put David at ease. "My dear friends," she said, embracing them both. "I'm so glad you're here." She turned to Emily with a conspiratorial wink. "And I have something special for you, young lady." Clara led them to a private dressing room where a child-sized pink dress hung on a golden hanger. Emily gasped, reaching out to touch the soft fabric with trembling fingers. "Island. Is this for me?" she whispered. "Every princess needs her ball gown," Clara said softly. "Let's get you ready." 20 minutes later, Emily emerged transformed. The dress fit perfectly, making her look like a miniature belle of the ball. David's throat tightened with emotion as he watched his daughter twirl in front of the mirror. "You look beautiful, sweetheart," he managed to say. As they entered the main ballroom, David felt the weight of countless eyes upon them. Ladies in designer dresses and men in tailored tuxedos mingled around elegant tables. The air buzzed with sophisticated conversation and tinkling champagne glasses. David's collar felt too tight, his palms growing sweaty. "Remember," Clara whispered, "you're here because you belong. Your gift is just as valuable as anyone else's in this room." Emily squeezed his hand. "You can do it, Daddy." The evening progressed with speeches and performances from various artists. David waited backstage, his heart thundering in his chest as he watched Emily sitting proudly in the front row next to Clara. The stage manager gave him a 5-minute warning. Taking deep breaths, David closed his eyes and thought of his late wife, Sarah. "This is for you too," he whispered. "For both of you. And now," the announcer's voice rang out, "please welcome David Miller." The spotlight found him as he walked to the microphone. The sea of faces before him blurred into a gentle darkness beyond the bright lights. David caught Emily's encouraging smile and felt his nervousness transform into determination. The first notes of the piano filled the air. David closed his eyes, let out a breath, and began to sing. His voice, rich and pure, carried the weight of years of love and loss, hope and healing. The song spoke of darkness giving way to dawn, of finding strength in the depths of despair. As he reached the chorus, David opened his eyes to find the entire room transfixed. Several guests dabbed at their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. In the front row, Emily beamed with pride, her hands clasped together as if in prayer. The final verse rose from somewhere deep within his soul. David's voice soared through the ballroom, carrying with it every dream he'd ever buried, every tear he'd hidden from Emily, every moment of joy they'd shared despite their struggles. When the last note faded into silence, the room held its breath for a heartbeat. Then, the applause exploded like thunder. The audience rose to their feet, their faces shining with emotion. Emily jumped up and down, clapping wildly. Clara wiped tears from her eyes, smiling broadly. As David made his way off stage, guests reached out to touch his arm, offering congratulations and praise. A distinguished-looking man in a charcoal suit approached Clara, speaking intently while glancing in David's direction. Clara's face lit up as she nodded enthusiastically. Emily ran to him, throwing herself into his arms. "Daddy, you were amazing," she cried. "Everyone loved you." David held her tight, his heart so full it might burst. For one shining moment, everything felt perfect. Then he saw them. Standing near the back of the room, their faces hard and cold, were his late wife's parents. His mother-in-law's lips were pressed into a thin line as she whispered something to her husband. Their eyes met David's across the room, and the chill in their gaze cut through his joy like a knife. David instinctively tightened his hold on Emily, who remained blissfully unaware of their presence as she chatted excitedly about his performance. The warmth of the audience's applause still hung in the air, but David felt a cold knot forming in his stomach. His in-laws turned away, their disapproving whispers lost in the celebratory atmosphere of the ballroom, but their presence was like a shadow falling across the brightest day of David's recent life, a reminder that some battles weren't won with just a song. The morning sun painted soft shadows across David's face as he walked down to check the mailbox, his footsteps echoing in the quiet apartment complex corridor. His mind still lingered on last night's gala, the applause, the warmth, the possibility of change. The metal mailbox creaked as he pulled it open, revealing a stack of envelopes. Bills. Advertisement. More bills. Then his fingers froze on a thick, cream-colored envelope with an official law firm letterhead. His heart skipped a beat as he tore it open right there in the hallway, unable to wait. The words blurred before his eyes. Petition for custody modification, followed by the names of his late wife's parents. David's legs grew weak, and he had to lean against the wall to steady himself. As he read further, each accusation felt like a physical blow. Demonstrates persistent financial instability. Emotional instability following spouse's death. Pursuing unrealistic career changes at the expense of providing stability. Child's welfare at risk due to father's irresponsible choices. The paper shook in his trembling hands. David barely remembered walking back to his apartment, the world around him fuzzy and distant. He collapsed into a kitchen chair, the letter scattered across the worn tabletop, his head dropping into his hands. This was what he'd feared most, that daring to dream again would somehow cost him everything. The sound of Emily's footsteps padding down the hallway made his chest tighten with fear. "Daddy?" Emily's voice was small and worried. She stood in her pajamas, her dark hair still messy from sleep. "What's wrong?" David tried to gather the papers quickly, but Emily had already seen them. She moved closer, her small hand resting on his shoulder. Even at 10 years old, she had an uncanny ability to sense when something was truly wrong. "Is it about Grandma and Grandpa?" she asked quietly. "Are they trying to take me away?" David's throat felt too tight to speak. He pulled Emily into a fierce hug instead, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. "I won't let that happen," he managed finally, his voice rough. Emily pulled back just enough to look him in the eyes. Her face held a determination that reminded him so much of her mother. "We'll fight this together, Daddy. I promise." The morning passed in a blur of phone calls. David's hands shook as he dialed Clara's number, explaining the situation. Her response was immediate and fierce. "Don't you dare give up hope, David Miller." Clara's voice crackled through the phone. "I know an excellent lawyer who handles family cases. She's tough but fair, and she'll work with your budget." By afternoon, David sat in a modest law office downtown, The custody petition spread across the desk between him and Sarah Chen, the lawyer Clara had recommended. She was younger than he'd expected, but her eyes were sharp and kind as she reviewed the documents. "They're trying to paint you as unstable because you're pursuing music again," Sarah observed, tapping her pen against the papers. "But we can turn that around. You're not being reckless, Harris. You're showing Emily the importance of following dreams while still maintaining your regular job. That's good parenting." David stared at his clasped hands. "What if they're right? What if I'm being selfish?" Sarah leaned forward. "Mr. Miller, you've raised Emily alone for 5 years. You've kept a roof over her head, food on the table, and most importantly, you've given her love and stability. That's what courts look for, not fancy houses or trust funds." The rest of the day passed in a haze of paperwork and preparations. David went through the motions of his normal routine, making dinner, helping Emily with homework, reading her favorite bedtime story. But his mind kept circling back to the custody petition, to all the ways he might lose her. Later that night, David lay awake in his bed, listening to Emily's soft breathing through the thin wall between their rooms. The sound had always soothed him, a gentle reminder that despite everything they'd lost, they still had each other. Now it filled him with an aching fear. Every choice he'd made since losing his wife had been for Emily. Working multiple jobs, moving to a smaller apartment, giving up his music, all to ensure she had what she needed. Had he ruined everything by daring to sing again, by letting himself hope for something more? Emily's breathing hitched slightly in her sleep, then settled back into its peaceful rhythm. David pressed his hands against his eyes, trying to hold back tears. The memory of her face watching him perform at the gala, shining with pride and joy, seemed to mock him now. He'd thought he was showing her how to be brave, how to chase dreams. Instead, he might have given his in-laws the weapon they needed to take her away. The night stretched endlessly before him, full of doubts and fears. Tomorrow, he would have to be strong. Tomorrow, he would have to fight. But tonight, in the darkness of his room, David Miller lay awake and wondered if the price of dreaming might be too high after all. The courtroom's wooden benches creaked under shifting bodies as David sat with his hands clasped tightly in his lap. The morning light filtered through tall windows, casting long shadows across the polished floor. His worn suit, the same one he'd worn to the gala, felt too tight around his neck. Across the aisle, his in-laws sat rigid and stern, their expensive clothes and perfect posture a stark contrast to his humble appearance. Emily's grandmother, Margaret, wouldn't meet his eyes. Her husband, Robert, stared straight ahead, jaw clenched. Their lawyer, Mr. Patterson, stood tall in his designer suit, arranging papers with practiced precision. "Your Honor," Mr. Patterson began, his voice carrying through the hushed courtroom, "we're here today because we have serious concerns about Mr. Miller's ability to provide a stable environment for his daughter, Emily." He gestured toward David. "Since his wife's passing, Mr. Miller has worked a series of low-paying jobs, waiting tables, delivering packages, whatever he can find. And now, instead of securing steady employment, he's chasing pipe dreams of becoming a singer." David's throat tightened. Each word felt like a physical blow. His own lawyer, Sarah Martinez, squeezed his arm reassuringly. She wasn't as polished as Patterson. But her eyes burned with determination. "And while Mr. Miller pursues these musical aspirations," Patterson continued, "young Emily lacks the structure and stability a child her age desperately needs. My clients can provide that stability, a proper home, excellent schools, and the financial security that Emily deserves." When Sarah stood to speak, her voice carried warmth and conviction. "Your Honor, what we're really discussing today is love, dedication, and the true meaning of good parenting." She moved to stand beside David. "Yes, David Miller works multiple jobs. Yes, he lives in a modest apartment. But every single one of those jobs, every extra shift he takes, is for his daughter." The judge, an older woman with kind eyes and silver hair, listened intently as Sarah continued. "We have several character witnesses today who can attest to Mr. Miller's devotion as a father." Sarah gestured to the benches behind David where Clara Johnson sat, elegant and composed in her navy suit. Clara approached the stand first. Under oath, she spoke about meeting David at the wedding, about seeing the love between father and daughter. Emily's eyes light up whenever she looks at her father. Clara testified. And I've seen David skip meals to make sure Emily has everything she needs for school. That's not instability. That's sacrifice. The bride from the wedding, Jessica Turner, took the stand next. She'd come straight from her honeymoon to testify. When Mr. Miller sang at our wedding, she said, dabbing at her eyes with a tissue. It wasn't just about the music. The way he looked at his daughter in the crowd, that's what moved everyone to tears. You could feel the love between them. But Patterson was relentless in his cross-examination. Mrs. Johnson, isn't it true that you had to provide charity for Emily's piano lessons? Doesn't that prove Mr. Miller can't provide for his daughter's basic enrichment? Clara's voice remained steady. I didn't provide charity. I invested in talent and determination. There's a difference. As the morning wore on, David's in-laws presented bank statements, apartment inspection reports, and school records showing Emily's occasional tardiness on mornings when David worked late shifts. Each piece of evidence felt like another weight on David's shoulders. Your Honor, Patterson pressed, Mr. Miller's monthly income barely covers rent and utilities. How can he possibly provide for a growing child? And now he's pursuing this singing career, taking time away from stable employment opportunities. Is this the example we want to set for Emily? David's hands trembled slightly as he watched his in-laws on the stand. Margaret spoke about her concerns, her voice breaking. We just want what's best for our granddaughter. Since losing our Sarah. She paused, composing herself. Emily is all we have left of her. Robert was more direct. The man can barely keep a steady job. Now he's singing at weddings? What kind of future is that for our granddaughter? Sarah's cross-examination was gentle but firm. Mrs. Harrison, when was the last time you visited Emily at home? Margaret shifted uncomfortably. We haven't been welcome. Isn't it true that you've refused David's invitations for Sunday dinners? That you've turned down chances to attend Emily's school concerts? The question hung in the air, unanswered. David took the stand last, his heart pounding. Sarah's questions let him speak from his heart about his life with Emily. Their morning routines, homework sessions at the kitchen table, weekend trips to the park where they'd sing together. Music isn't just a dream, he explained, his voice steady despite his nerves. It's how Emily and I heal together. It's how we remember her mother. And yes, I work hard jobs, but I've never missed a parent-teacher conference. I've never missed tucking her in at night. Patterson's cross-examination was brutal. Mr. Miller, how much is in your savings account right now? David swallowed hard. $312. And if Emily got sick? Had a medical emergency? I'd figure it out. I always do. Like you figured out your singing career? Before Sarah could object, the judge held up her hand. The afternoon light had faded to dusk outside the tall windows. Papers rustled as the judge reviewed her notes, the silence in the courtroom growing heavier by the second. Finally, she looked up. I've heard compelling arguments from both sides today, she said, her voice firm but gentle. This is not a decision to be made lightly. I'm ordering a 2-week continuation to review all evidence and testimony before rendering my final verdict. David's heart sank. 2 more weeks of uncertainty. 2 more weeks of fear. Emily, who had been waiting outside with a court assistant, was allowed in as the session ended. She ran straight to David, throwing her arms around his waist. He held her close, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo. It's okay, Daddy, she whispered, though her own voice shook slightly. We're still together. David nodded, unable to speak past the lump in his throat. He watched his in-laws file out of the courtroom, their backs straight, their lawyers already huddled in discussion. Clara touched his shoulder as she passed, offering a supportive smile. But all David could do was hold Emily's hand, trying to memorize the feeling of her small fingers wrapped around his, wondering if these moments might soon become memories instead of his daily reality. Chapter 8. The Lowest Point. Chapter 7. The Courtroom Battle. Scene 2. The Promise. David's key turned in the lock with a heavy click. The apartment felt smaller than usual, its walls pressing in around him as he stepped inside. Bills and legal papers littered the kitchen table, stark reminders of the battle ahead. His shoulders slumped as he dropped his suit jacket over a chair. Emily sat at their small piano, her fingers hovering motionless over the keys. She hadn't touched them since they'd returned from court. The silence between them felt thick enough to touch. Maybe. David's voice cracked. He cleared his throat and tried again. Maybe I should stop with the singing for now. Focus on picking up extra shifts at the restaurant instead. Emily's head snapped up, her eyes wide with disbelief. Daddy, no! It's what responsible parents do, sweetheart. They make sacrifices. The words tasted bitter in his mouth. If I show the judge I'm working more regular hours. But your voice. Emily's lower lip trembled. It's special. When you sing, it's like, she struggled to find the words, like Mom is with us again. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and the sight broke David's heart. He reached for her, but she jumped up from the piano bench. You can't quit. Her voice rose, thick with emotion. Remember at the wedding? Everyone stopped to listen. And at the gala, even those fancy people knew it was special. She wiped her eyes with the back of her hand. Your singing gives us both strength. It's like a light in the dark. Thanks for watching. David stood frozen, watching his daughter's shoulders shake with sobs. She looked so much like her mother in that moment. The same fierce determination, the same unwavering belief in him. I need some air, he managed to say. Stay with Mrs. Martinez next door for a bit, okay? The evening air was cool against his face as David walked through their neighborhood. Street lamps flickered on one by one, casting pools of light on the cracked sidewalk. His feet carried him without thought to the small park where he and his wife used to take Emily when she was tiny. The old swing set creaked in the breeze. David sank onto a bench, his head in his hands. Memories washed over him. Sarah's laugh, the way her eyes lit up when he sang, how she'd push him to perform at open mic nights even when he was nervous. Don't let fear silence your gift, she'd told him once, on this very bench. Your voice touches people's hearts, David. That's rare and precious. The words echoed in his mind, as clear as if she'd just spoken them. He lifted his head, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. What example would he be setting for Emily if he gave up now? How could he teach her to chase her dreams if he abandoned his own at the first sign of trouble? Sarah would want him to fight. Not just in court, but on stage too. She'd want him to show Emily that being responsible didn't mean burying your passions. That sometimes the bravest thing a parent could do was pursue their dreams while keeping their child close. David stood up, his resolve strengthening with each step as he walked home. The streets were quiet now, but in his mind, he could hear music. Sarah's favorite song, the one he'd sung at their wedding. The one that had always made Emily smile, even as a baby. When he opened their apartment door, the living room was dark except for a small lamp. Emily had fallen asleep on the couch, her piano notebook clutched to her chest. Sheet music she'd been working on peeked out from the pages, her childish handwriting marking the notes. David knelt beside her, gently brushing hair from her forehead. His throat tightened as he took in her peaceful face, so trusting even in sleep. I won't let them take you away, he whispered, his voice barely audible. I promise, sweetheart. We'll fight this together, with everything we've got. He carefully lifted the notebook from her grasp, placing it on the coffee table. The page it was open to had a title written in purple crayon. Daddy's Song. Below were simple notes, a melody Emily had been composing just for him. David's vision blurred with tears. This was what they were fighting for, not just custody, but their shared love of music, their bond, their little family's heart and soul. He wouldn't let anyone tear that apart. Emily stirred slightly, murmuring in her sleep. David pulled the throw blanket over her shoulders and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead. Tomorrow would bring more battles, more stress, more uncertainty. But tonight, watching his daughter sleep peacefully, David knew with absolute certainty that he'd made the right choice. Some gifts were meant to be shared, not silenced. Some fights were worth every struggle. And some promises, like the one he'd just made to Emily, were unbreakable. Chapter 9. The Final Verdict. Chapter 8. The Lowest Point. Scene 2. The Final Verdict. The courtroom's heavy oak doors groaned as David stepped back inside, their ancient hinges protesting against the weight of history and heartbreak that these walls had witnessed. Morning sunlight streamed through tall, arched windows, casting long golden shadows across the polished marble floor that reflected his nervous footsteps. His hands trembled slightly as he straightened his tie, the same navy blue one with tiny silver threads that he'd worn at the wedding where everything had changed, where his voice had first found its way back to him after years of silence. The familiar scent of old wood and leather-bound law books filled his nostrils as he surveyed the room. Behind him, he could hear the rustle of clothing and whispered conversations as people settled into the gallery benches. Each sound seemed amplified in the solemn space, creating a symphony of anxiety that matched the rapid beating of his heart. Emily sat in the front row between Clara and their lawyer, her small fingers clutching the worn piano notebook she'd brought for luck. The leather cover was cracked and faded from years of use, filled with her childish handwriting and musical notes that looked like tiny birds scattered across the pages. Her blue dress, borrowed from a neighbor's daughter and carefully pressed the night before, made her look especially young and vulnerable against the imposing backdrop of the courtroom. The dress was slightly too big, its sleeves covering her hands as she fidgeted with the notebook's frayed ribbon bookmark. Clara reached over and gently smoothed Emily's hair, which David had attempted to braid that morning with shaking fingers. The result was lopsided but held together with bobby pins and hope. Emily's eyes, wide and bright despite everything, met his across the room, and she offered him a brave smile that broke his heart and mended it all at once. The court calls David Miller to the stand. The bailiff's voice boomed through the chamber, making several people jump. David's legs felt like lead as he stood, his cheap suit rustling against the wooden bench. The fabric was slightly wrinkled despite his careful ironing, and he was acutely aware of a small coffee stain near his left cuff that he'd tried unsuccessfully to remove that morning. His footsteps echoed in the hushed room as he made his way forward, each step feeling like a mile. The witness stand loomed before him like a mountain to climb, and he could feel dozens of eyes tracking his movement. After being sworn in, his voice barely above a whisper as he repeated the oath, David settled into the witness chair. The leather was cold against his back, and he gripped the armrests to steady himself. He was acutely aware of his in-laws' cold stares from across the room. Margaret and Harold Whitmore sat rigid and proper in their expensive charcoal suits, their backs straight as boards. Margaret's pearls caught the light every time she shifted, and Harold's gold watch gleamed as he folded his manicured hands in his lap. Their expensive clothes created a stark contrast to David's modest off-the-rack suit, emphasizing the financial divide that they'd weaponized against him. Their faces were masks of disapproval, lips pressed into thin lines, eyes hard as winter ice. "Mr. Miller," his lawyer began gently, her voice warm and encouraging, "please tell the court about your relationship with your daughter Emily." David took a deep breath, the air catching slightly in his throat. His eyes found Emily's encouraging smile, and something loosened in his chest. "Emily is everything to me," he started, his voice growing stronger with each word like a song finding its melody. "When my wife Sarah passed away 3 years ago, Emily became my reason to get up every morning, to keep trying, to keep living when everything inside me wanted to give up." The words flowed easier now, carrying the weight of truth. He described their daily routine with the tenderness of a man who treasured every ordinary moment. Making breakfast together in their tiny kitchen, Emily standing on a step-stool to help flip pancakes, often resulting in batter on the ceiling and giggles that made the mess worthwhile. Walking her to school hand in hand, her backpack bouncing with each step as she chattered about her dreams and plans. Helping with homework between his shifts at the restaurant, sitting at their wobbly kitchen table under the fluorescent light that flickered when the wind blew too hard. His voice caught as he spoke about their tight budget, about the jar on their kitchen counter labeled Emily's Piano Lessons, where they counted every coin and crumpled dollar bill. About the times he'd eaten cereal for dinner so she could have a proper meal. About shopping at thrift stores and making it an adventure, pretending they were treasure hunters searching for hidden gems among the donated clothes. "Yes, I'm a waiter," he acknowledged, meeting the judge's eyes directly, his chin lifting with quiet dignity. "I've worked as a dishwasher, my hands raw from hot water and harsh soap. I've delivered packages in the rain, loaded trucks before dawn, whatever it took to keep food on our table and a roof over our heads. Some might see that as unstable. I see it as doing whatever necessary to be a good father." The in-law's lawyer shifted in his seat, preparing to object, but the judge waved him down with a slight gesture, clearly invested in David's testimony. Her eyes showed the kind of attention that suggested she was hearing more than just words. She was listening to the heart behind them. "And now you're pursuing a singing career?" his lawyer prompted, her tone careful and measured. David shook his head slowly, choosing his words like a man selecting precious stones. "No, Your Honor. I'm not chasing fame or fortune. Music." He paused, his throat working as emotions threatened to overwhelm him. "Music has always been how I process emotions, how I connect with others. When I sing, I'm not running from responsibility. I'm healing. I'm showing Emily that even after great loss, you can find your voice again." His eyes welled up as he continued, the memories of Sarah's funeral washing over him. The silence that had followed, months when he couldn't bear to hear a single note. Emily's patient encouragement, her small hands leading him back to their old piano. "Every note I sing is for her, to show her that dreams don't have to die when life gets hard. That love is stronger than grief. That her father may not be perfect or wealthy, but he'll never stop trying to give her the best life possible." A tear slipped down his cheek, and he didn't bother to wipe it away. The courtroom was so quiet that the tick of the wall clock seemed to mark each heartbeat. The judge leaned forward, her expression softening like ice beginning to thaw. "Mr. Miller, how do you respond to concerns that pursuing music might detract from your parental duties?" "Your Honor, I work my regular jobs during the day, always making sure Emily's needs come first. I only practice or perform when Emily is doing her homework or after she's safely asleep, tucked in with her favorite stuffed rabbit and a goodnight song." He gestured toward Clara, who nodded in confirmation, her own eyes bright with unshed tears. "The few opportunities I've had, like Mrs. Johnson's charity gala, have been carefully chosen to not disrupt our routine. Emily was with me that night, and she saw her father stand up and find his courage again." The in-law's lawyer rose for cross-examination, his expensive suit rustling like autumn leaves. His cologne was overpowering in the small space, and his smile was sharp as a blade. "Isn't it true that you're living paycheck to paycheck? That you can barely afford proper music lessons for Emily?" "Yes," David admitted honestly, his voice steady despite the attack. "We don't have much. But Emily has never gone hungry, even if it meant I skipped meals. She's never missed a doctor's appointment, even when I had to leave work early and lose pay. Her homework is always done, completed together at our kitchen table while I help her sound out difficult words. Her clothes are clean, even if they're secondhand, and our home is filled with love." His voice strengthened like a river finding its course. "Money can't buy the bond we share or replace the hours we spend making music together at our old piano, the one Sarah taught me to play on when we were newlyweds." The questioning continued for what felt like hours, the lawyer's voice growing more aggressive with each attempt to break David's resolve. But David remained steady, his answers sincere and unshakable. Each one delivered with the quiet strength of a man who had nothing left to lose, except the thing that mattered most. He spoke of bedtime stories and scraped knees kissed better, of Emily's first word and her last report card, of the way she hummed while doing dishes and how she always saved him the last bite of her dessert. When he finally stepped down, his legs shaky from the emotional toll, Emily's eyes shone with pride so bright it could have lit the entire courthouse. Clara squeezed his shoulder as he passed, her touch warm and reassuring. After brief closing arguments that seemed to blur together in David's exhausted mind, the judge called for a short recess. Those 15 minutes felt like years as David sat with Emily in the hallway, holding her small hand while they waited on a hard wooden bench. Clara brought them water in paper cups, but David's throat was too tight to swallow. Emily's head rested against his shoulder, her piano notebook open in her lap to a song she'd written called Daddy's Brave Heart. When the judge returned, the courtroom fell silent as a held breath. David's heart hammered against his ribs as everyone rose, then settled back into their seats with a collective rustle of fabric and creaking wood. "In matters of custody," the judge began, her voice carrying the weight of years of difficult decisions, "this court's primary concern is the child's well-being. While financial stability is important, it is not the only measure of good parenting." She looked directly at David's in-laws, her gaze unflinching and direct. "Wealth and social status cannot replace genuine love and dedication." Emily's grip on David's hand tightened, her small fingers intertwining with his like they were anchoring each other against a storm. Mr. Miller has demonstrated extraordinary commitment to his daughter's welfare, working multiple jobs without complaint, sacrifice evident in every aspect of his testimony. His recent musical pursuits, far from being irresponsible, show admirable resilience and provide a powerful example of perseverance for his child. The judge's voice grew warmer. This court has seen many cases, but rarely have I witnessed such evident devotion between a parent and child. The judge's next words seemed to fill the entire room like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. The court rules in favor of David Miller, granting him full custody of Emily Miller. Relief crashed over David like a tidal wave, washing away months of fear and uncertainty in one glorious moment. Emily let out a small sob of joy and threw her arms around his neck, nearly knocking him off the bench. He hugged her tightly, his own tears streaming down his face and mixing with hers as the judge continued speaking about visitation rights and other details that seemed distant and unimportant in that moment of pure victory. Behind them, Clara applauded softly, her face radiant with joy. Even some of the court staff were smiling, moved by the obvious love between father and daughter. As they left the courthouse 20 minutes later, bright afternoon sunlight warming their faces like a blessing, David knelt down to Emily's level on the wide stone steps. She was still clutching her piano notebook, her cheeks wet with happy tears that sparkled like diamonds in the golden light. The courthouse loomed behind them, its imposing columns no longer a threat but a monument to their triumph. He pulled her into another tight embrace, breathing in the familiar scent of her strawberry shampoo and the lingering smell of the pencil erasers in her backpack. "We made it, sweetheart," he whispered against her hair, his voice thick with emotion and wonder. "We really made it." Chapter 10. A New Song. Chapter 10. A New Beginning. Scene 1. 6 weeks after the court victory, the community center buzzed with excitement. Handmade posters decorated the walls announcing David, Emily Miller, father-daughter concert. The modest auditorium, with its well-worn seats and simple stage, had been transformed by twinkling lights and fresh flowers. Clara's touch, no doubt. David stood backstage adjusting Emily's white ribbon. Her dress, a gift from Clara, flowed like fresh snow around her small frame. His daughter's fingers danced nervously over the piano keys of the upright they'd borrowed for practice. "Ready, sweetheart?" David asked, his own heart racing beneath his navy blazer. Emily nodded, her eyes bright with determination. "I've been practicing every day, Daddy. I won't mess up." "Hey." He knelt beside her. "Remember what we said. It's not about being perfect. It's about playing from the heart," Emily finished, grinning. "Like you sing." Through the curtain, they could hear the murmur of the gathering crowd. Clara had spread the word throughout the neighborhood, and it seemed everyone had come. The kind neighbors who'd brought them casseroles during the custody battle, Emily's teachers who'd testified to her happiness, even the bride and groom from that fateful wedding. The stage manager, a volunteer from the community center, poked his head around the curtain. 5 minutes, Mr. Miller." David took a deep breath, remembering how far they'd come. The custody battle was behind them, and here they were, about to share their music together. Emily had worked so hard on her song, spending hours at her new piano, Clara's gift after the court victory, perfecting every note. The house lights dimmed. Emily squeezed his hand 3 times, their secret signal for "I love you." David returned the squeeze as they walked onto the stage together, greeted by warm applause. Emily settled at the piano, her posture perfect just as her teacher had shown her. David stood beside her, one hand resting gently on the piano's polished surface. The spotlight felt warm on his face as he addressed the audience. "Thank you all for coming tonight," he said, his voice steady and clear. "This first song is special to us. Emily wrote it during some tough times, and now." He glanced down at his daughter, who beamed back at him. "Now it's become our victory song." Emily's fingers found the opening notes, playing with careful confidence. The melody was simple but touching, exactly what you'd expect from a child's heart full of love and hope. David closed his eyes, letting the familiar tune wash over him before joining in with the lyrics they'd crafted together. "Through the storm and through the night, your hand holds mine so tight. Though the world may try to say we're wrong, together we stay strong." Their voices blended perfectly, his rich baritone supporting her sweet, clear notes. From the front row, Clara dabbed at her eyes with a handkerchief. Next to her sat Mr. Thompson, the music producer who'd approached them at the gala. He nodded appreciatively, tapping his foot to the rhythm. As they moved through their set list, David felt something he hadn't experienced in years, pure joy in performing. But this was different from his old dreams of solo stardom. This was better. Every few measures, he and Emily would exchange glances, sharing secret smiles as they hit the harmonies they'd practiced in their living room. The final song came too quickly. Emily's fingers danced across the keys with growing confidence, and David's voice soared to the rafters. When the last note faded, there was a moment of perfect silence before the audience erupted in applause. Everyone rose to their feet, their cheers echoing through the auditorium. Emily jumped up from the piano bench and threw her arms around David's waist. He lifted her up, spinning her around as she giggled with delight. Flowers appeared on stage, roses from Clara, daisies from their neighbors, a small bouquet of wildflowers from Emily's classmates. After the applause finally died down, they made their way to the community center's lobby. Mr. Thompson approached, his expression warm and genuine. "That was something special," he said, shaking David's hand. "The offer still stands. We'd love to work with you. But I understand your priorities." He glanced at Emily with respect. "We can start small, local venues, flexible scheduling. Family first." David pulled Emily close. "Thank you. We'll need to look at the details, make sure it works with Emily's school and activities. But yes, I think we'd like that." Clara appeared beside them, enveloping them both in a hug. "You two were magnificent! Emily, those piano lessons are really paying off." The lobby slowly emptied as they said goodbye to their supporters. Finally, it was just father and daughter, walking home under a canopy of stars. The spring air was cool and sweet, carrying the scent of blooming jasmine from neighborhood gardens. Emily skipped alongside David, still humming their songs. Her white dress seemed to glow in the moonlight as she twirled, unable to contain her happiness. She stopped suddenly, tugging at his hand and looking up at the sky. "Daddy, this is just the beginning," she said, her voice full of wonder and certainty. David smiled down at his daughter, his heart overflowing with love and gratitude for this precious second chance. "Yes, sweetheart," he replied softly. "Our song has only just started." Click the next video to uncover what happens when David steps into the courtroom, torn between music, love, and custody of his daughter. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss what comes next, and drop your theories in the comments. Do you think David's voice will save him or cost him everything? I'd love to know where you're watching from. Drop your city, your state, or even your country in the comments. And share what this story made you feel. Did it remind you of your own battles, or someone you love who refused to give up? If you believe in stories that celebrate courage, faith, and second chances, I invite you to subscribe and follow. Together, we're building a community of hope, one story at a time. And before you go, please remember this. You are seen, you are valued, and you are never alone. Until next time, may you keep believing in your own song, because the world is waiting to hear it.